Hello everybody and welcome to the first episode of No Frills, Just Facts. This is where I try to race against the clock and explain concepts in less than 5 minutes without any frills. So let's get into it. Today we're going to talk about compression. Compression is something that has confused a lot of guitarists, so I'm going to try to simplify it down into things that most of us can relate to or understand. First things first, to understand compression, this is what I want you to do. I want you to get an amp, I want you to make sure that amp is clean, and I want you to pluck a single note as softly as you can, and then pluck it as hard as you can, and you will notice that the soft one that you plucked was quieter, and the hard one that you plucked was louder. Okay, that is what no compression sounds like. Then I want you to grab a fuzz pedal or a heavy overdrive pedal, or maybe just crank up the gain on your amp. And I want you to pluck that same note just as soft as the first time, and then pluck it just as hard as the first time. And what you'll notice is that the softer plucked note and the harder plucked note were pretty close in volume, a lot closer than when the amp was clean, right? This is what compression sounds like. Compression, in its most simple form, takes quiet notes and makes them louder, takes loud notes and makes them softer. However, there's a lot more to it, and this is where people get confused. We have to make the distinction between compression and saturation. Compression is what happened when you squished everything together in terms of that volume, when you cranked the gain and the quiet note was louder, the loud note was softer, and they were about the same volume. Saturation is when that happens and you get grit, or you get overdrive, or you get fuzz. That is where we use the term saturation. You've saturated the signal. It goes back to tape days, and that's what gives it that crunchy tone. Compression is just that initial act of compressing the signal and evening out the volume. And this is why a lot of people get confused by it, is because it's a very subtle effect. It's something that you don't notice unless you have the ability to be a dynamic player, unless you have the ability to pluck softer and pluck harder, or if you're using it as a funk player where you want all those little nuanced, little funky pick noises to be heard. That's where compressors come in handy. Now that we understand the simple concept of compression, we need to understand the key terms that you're going to see on a pedal. We need to know threshold, input gain, ratio, knee, attack, release, and output. So let's start with threshold. Threshold is exactly what it sounds like. It is a point at which, when your guitar signal hits it, it begins to compress. Now, most guitar pedals operate with what we call a fixed threshold. There are some where you can actually adjust the threshold, where you can lower it or raise it. However, most pedals that we're used to rely on a fixed threshold. Then that's where that input gain comes in, which is where, when you turn up that input, you are pushing more of your guitar's signal and making it hit that threshold, instead of just kind of sitting here and, maybe when you strum really hard, it peaks up and it hits that threshold. We're actually experiencing where we've raised the overall signal and it's going to hit that threshold a lot sooner. Once it hits that threshold, it begins to compress. How hard it compresses is dependent upon our ratio and our knee. How much compression is applied is measured by the compressor's ratio. The most common ratios that we see are 2-to-1, 4-to-1, 8-to-1, 10-to-1, sometimes all the way up to 20-to-1 or even infinity to 1. If our ratio is 2-to-1, that means for every 2 decibels that your guitar signal goes over the threshold, it will only allow 1 to come through. That means if your ratio is 2-to-1, your threshold is here and your guitar signal goes 10 decibels above that threshold, only 5 decibels will actually get through. Knee is a term that we don't use very often in terms of pedals, but what it essentially does is it says how harshly it's going to pull it down, meaning, is it going to pull it back like this, or is it going to pull it back at a slower rate, meaning it'll not be as noticeable of an effect. Honestly, I wouldn't worry about knee if you're only using compression in a pedal form, because we rarely see it. Next, we got to look at attack and release. Release is sometimes also called sustain, and what this essentially means is your attack is a time-based knob, meaning that it measures how quickly that compressor is going to act. If you have your knob turned down very low, it means it has a low attack time, and it means that it will grab that guitar signal and pull it back to your desired ratio as soon as possible. If you have a longer attack time, it means that it will take a little longer for the compressor to kick in and actually pull that signal back to your desired ratio. Release and sustain is how long that effect will be applied for, meaning that your release knob is a time-measured knob. The lower it is means the faster that the compressor will let go of your guitar signal. It also means that if you have a longer release time or a longer sustain time, that compressor will hold on to whatever that guitar signal is for a lot longer, and that's why it increases your sustain. If you strum a chord as your guitar signal goes down, it will still be holding on to it and compressing it, and it will give the illusion that that chord will last longer and be louder for longer. The last knob we have to talk about is our output knob. An output is just that. It's sometimes also called makeup gain. It literally just says after the effect has been applied, after your signal has been compressed, how loud is that affected signal going to be coming out of your amp. A few key things to remember. Compression is a subtle effect, and you really will only notice it if you play funk with a lot of nuanced pick things, or if you take the opportunity to play softly and then play loud. I will also say that compression pedals typically are more noticeable on single coils. That being said, it doesn't mean you can't use them on humbuckers, and also there are pedals like the Keeley compression pedal, which actually have a switch for whether or not it's a single coil or a humbucker. Can be very useful. So tell me what you think. Do you like compressor pedals? Do you use them? Are they an enigma? They were for me for a long time until I figured all this nonsense out. Also, let me know down in the comments below what your favorite compressor pedal is. I have the 1176 by UAD, and I really like it, but I'm always interested to find some more. Maybe what we do is if we get one compression pedal that seems to stand out quite a bit, I'll go ahead and buy that pedal and do a full run through and explain these settings a little better. Could be fun. Thank you guys so much for watching. Go make someone else's day better. Once again, my name is Mac Wright. Please like and subscribe. We'll see you around.